Today is February 1st, and we're reading from Matthew chapter 27. The scenario is growing, building, as Jesus has been handed over to Pontius Pilate in chapter 27. I've often wondered what it must have been like when the most holy man that has ever lived, and who is God, goes before an earthly leader. And he's brought to Pilate. The Bible tells us in the first couple verses that he's bound, and he's placed before Pilate. Now, in this, Judas, at this point, he goes and he hangs himself. Think of it, what must have been going through Judas's mind. There's been a lot of speculation as to why Judas betrayed Jesus. Some have suggested that Judas may not have intended, and that's why he ended up killing himself, was not intending that that Jesus would be nailed to a cross. What he was really trying to accomplish was to force Jesus to prove himself and to assume an earthly throne. Judas, no doubt, desired to be a part of a government that would overthrow Rome and would usher in this messianic reign. So since Jesus wouldn't prove himself in front of the religious leaders, some suggest that Judas, no doubt, may have handed Jesus over, and that Jesus, in that situation, would be able to win every argument and defend himself, and would show himself to be king, and would force him, and the crowds would then put him right into the position of king and authority. But instead of that happening, it all ran south, and Jesus is being interrogated, and Judas realizes that this did not happen as he had intended, and he goes back, he throws the pieces of silver in the temple. After they tell him that they're not going to change their verdict, he goes and he hangs himself. What a terrible, tragic end of someone who walked with Jesus for 3.5 years, who was a part of his earthly ministry, heard his powerful preaching, was a part himself in the authority of healing the sick and all these incredible things, and yet it ends up he dies. Now the Bible says in the 13th verse that Jesus is facing Pilate, and the governor's asking him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answers, "It's as you say." And then he asked him, all these things that people are testifying against you. But he answered him not a word, and that amazed the governor. Most people try to defend themselves. If anybody could have won in a debate, Jesus certainly could have. But he remained silent. When you're falsely accused of something that you've done, that you were not guilty of, it's so easy for us to go and to defend ourselves. But Jesus said not a word. When Pilate then offers a notorious criminal, as was their custom, in exchange or to be determined to release one, either Jesus or Barabbas, Pilate is amazed that the people choose Barabbas. And he is, the Bible tells us, he asked the question after the crowd's insinuating, "Let him be crucified." And he asked, "Why? What has he done?" And they cried out all the more, "Let him be crucified," in verse 23. So you can see that the crowd has just gone mad, and Pilate is absolutely realizing, it says in verse 24 that he could not prevail at all. So Pilate he washes his hands. He realizes there's nothing more he could do. And frankly, Pilate was doing everything he could to try to release Jesus, but it was intended to be. The soldiers then mocked Jesus. They don't realize who he is. They're stripping him, and they put on a scarlet robe to mock him. These thorns, they crush it into his head. They're kneeling and mocking him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they spit on him. They take a reed, they hit him over the head, over the crown of thorns, only setting those thorns in deeper. And then they take him away to be crucified. Be a hard thing to watch, wouldn't it? I mean, just think about it. Knowing what we knew, or what we know, it would be difficult to watch this. And so they take Jesus, and they crucify him. And on both sides of him, the Bible says, are two robbers. And look at all of the things that were being said to this most holy man. Verse 39, those who passed by blasphemed him. They're wagging their heads. They're saying, you who destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you're the Son of God, come down from the cross. And then likewise it says that the priests mocked, the scribes, the elders. They said, he saved others, but he can't save himself. If he's the king of Israel, let him come down from the cross and we will believe. And then they said he trusted God. Let him deliver him and if he will have him, for he said, I am the Son of God. Now think of it, coming from the religious crowd. Jesus had just totally destroyed them wherever he went. Mass crowds, thousands of people were following after Jesus. They loved him. The religious leaders hated Jesus. And now vengeance is being served. And again, think about that. Jesus, all the things they're saying, Jesus could have just said, I'm sick of this. The religious crowd, they don't believe. He could have said, I'm coming down from the cross. I'm going to assign the angels to destroy all these boys, and I'm going back to heaven. But he didn't. I'll tell you, that's the most amazing thing, that his commitment to stay on the cross. The Bible tells us in verse 45 that Jesus dies on the cross. And in verse 50, it says in verse 50 that he cried out with a loud voice. The other gospel says that he said it is finished, and he gave up the ghost. And verse 52, though, look what happens the moment Jesus dies. The veil in the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. That veil that separated common, ordinary people from the Holy of Holies. Nobody could go back there. So it was separated by this. But when God came down, he ripped that divider so that there was no longer a division, but rather whosoever will could enter into the Holy of Holies. And the Bible says that the earth shook and the rocks were split and the graves were open. And listen to this. Many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised from the dead. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. I think it's most incredible. What a scene this would have been. That Jesus died. And even in his death, resurrection power is there. In this spectacular sight. So when the centurion, the Bible says in verse 54, and those with him that were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and the things that had happened. The resurrection, the graves opening, the veil in the temple split in two. They feared greatly, saying, truly, this was the Son of God. Would have been there to have witnessed this. But I think there were an awful lot of people that knew in that moment this was no ordinary man. Jesus is buried in a borrowed tomb, Joseph's tomb. And then Pilate sets guards because they say, hey, we've heard rumors that, some are going to come, they'll take his body, and then they'll say that he rose from the dead. At least the critics knew what Jesus said, even though the disciples don't seem to remember it. So they had it sealed, they had it guarded, and it was set. And in their mind, I'm sure they thought, we'll hold off for 3 or 4 days, and then this thing will pass us by. In the meantime, the disciples are hiding away in a house. The windows are barred. The doors are bolted, fearing for their life. Their hopes are dashed. Everything they had staked their hope in is now gone. The man they believed was the Son of God, the Messiah, is dead. They saw him die. And now they have plenty of time to sit there. Nobody will be found at the tomb on resurrection morning. But in their mind, it's the darkest day in human history. Okay, listen, have a great day.